Dear students, in this module we will cover the policies that are oriented towards immigration. We will talk about immigration and the policy response of the governments in response to immigration, and we will also talk about the policies that allow dual citizenship. Let us understand the concern about immigration. Immigration generates opportunities as well as challenges for the countries of origin, because the countries of origin get some advantages through the opportunities that are kept open because of immigration. The origin countries also face some challenges because of people moving out of the country to other countries. In case of the developing countries, the kind of concerns that emerge as regards immigration. In the developing countries, the kind of concerns expressed with regard to immigration include loss of highly skilled workers, which is called as brain drain. This kind of brain drain may hamper the process of development and the progress made by the government and the country towards achieving higher levels of development. We have several examples from several countries that talk about the impact of brain drain on the country. Now, let us look at the views on immigration. Some of the developing countries consider immigration as a strategy to boost the development process. This is made possible through remittances or through alleviation of labor market pressures. Not only these two measures, but also through recognition about the contribution from the diaspora to developmental efforts. The diaspora contributes to the development of the origin country through variety of ways, and these include the financial investments in the home countries and transfer of knowledge, transfer of skills, capacity building, transfer of the know-how. Several such ways and means contribute to the development process of the home country with active involvement of the diaspora. There is evidence for this from the Global Migration Group publications. Now, let us turn towards the policies on immigration. Many of the countries that perceive their level of immigration as too high have instituted policies to encourage people to remain, and such policies to reduce the immigration levels included strengthening of educational and training institutions at home. This is understood because more and more youth move to other countries for better educational opportunities and better skill development opportunities that are available abroad and not available at the home country. By strengthening the educational and training institutions and facilities back home, the countries and the governments can retain the youth, particularly from moving to other countries. Another measure was in terms of boosting the domestic employment opportunities. because the emigration is linked to employment opportunities available elsewhere. So, the educational opportunities, skill development and capacity building, training opportunities and employment opportunities. By providing these three, several countries are trying to retain the people and discourage immigration from the country. Some countries have also adopted policies to retain the potential migrants with certain skills. For instance, health workers who are in short supply in the sending country itself, but there is also high demand in the destination countries. Some of the countries that are well known for immigration of nursing activity, some of the countries that are well known for immigration of people involved in the nursing activity, they migrate to other countries. As a result of that, the origin countries are facing the situation of shortage of manpower in the hospital industries and particularly the nursing staff. By 2013, 1/4 of the governments worldwide had policies to reduce the level of immigration from their countries. About 2/3 of the countries or governments had policies to maintain the current level of immigration, or these countries did not intervene to influence the immigration process. Means only 1/4 of the countries worldwide had policies to address the immigration through reduction of the immigration level. The remaining 10% governments had policies to raise the level of immigration from their countries. Since the mid-90s, proportion of governments with policies to reduce immigration changed little bit, while proportion of governments with policies to raise the immigration increased and proportion of governments with policies to maintain or not to intervene in immigration levels declined. Let us now look at the figure 1. This figure indicates the government's policy to influence immigration over 3 different time points: 1996, 2005 and 2013. The percentage of governments or percentage of countries that had policies to raise the immigration increased from 3% in 1996 to 6% by 25 and 10% by 2013. The percentage of governments with policies to reduce the immigration from the country remained same between 1996 and 25 at 23% and increased slightly to 26% by 2013. Look at the middle bars. The percentage of governments with policies to maintain or no intervention in immigration is the highest in both the time periods, say at about 70% between 96 and 25, and it came down to 64% in 2013. Let us continue the discussion on policies on immigration. Higher proportion of governments in the more developed regions, 84% had policies to maintain their level of immigration or did not intervene to influence the immigration levels, than the governments in the less developed regions with a figure of 58%. While the proportion remained virtually unchanged in the more developed regions since mid 70s. It declined considerably in case of less developed regions from 84% to 58%. In 2013, governments of 29% of the countries in less developed regions had policies to reduce immigration, compared to figure of 16% in case of more developed regions. In the more developed regions, the percentage of governments that had policies to reduce immigration experienced decline from 25% to 16%. In case of the less developed regions, it was about 14% in 2013. All the 20 countries with policies to raise the immigration in 2013, we have seen that 20 countries had policies to enhance the immigration level in 2013, and all these 20 countries were in less developed regions. The percentage of governments with policies to raise immigration increased from just 3%. Let us look at figure 2 that gives us information about the government policies to influence the level of immigration by level of development at 3 different time points: 1996, 2005 and 2013. In case of the more developed regions, the figures indicate the percentage of governments with policies to reduce immigration. In 1996, 25% of the governments from more developed regions were having policies to reduce immigration level, and this proportion declined to about 17% and 16% in the subsequent periods. On the other hand, in case of the less developed regions, the proportion of governments with policies to increase immigration, it increased from about 3% in 1996 to 8% by 25, and it reached 14% by 2013. Of all the 20 countries with policies to raise immigration in 2013 were in the less developed regions, and 12 of these 20 countries with policies to enhance the level of immigration were in Asia, while 5 were in Oceania and 3 were in Africa. 82% of the governments in Europe and the governments of Canada as well as the United States of America in the North America either had policies to maintain their current immigration levels or did not have any intention to intervene and influence the immigration levels, compared to about 54% of the governments in Asia and 38% in Oceania. Let us now look at table 1, which describes the scenario in terms of government's policies on immigration between 1976 and 2013. The first part gives the results by level of development. The table gives the number of countries and the percentage of countries. The response categories include raise in the level of immigration, maintain the same level or no intervention, or reduce the level of immigration. For the world as a whole, in 1976, 4% of the governments were having policies to raise the immigration, and this figure moved up to 10% by 2013. In case of maintaining the same level or no intervention at all in the immigration levels, the percentage declined from 83% to 64% for the world as a whole. In case of policy response to reduce the immigration level, there is an increase from 13% to 26% for the world as a whole. In the more developed regions, by 25, none of these countries were having any policy to raise the current level of immigration, whereas the response in terms of maintaining the same level or no intervention at all, it also remained almost same, around 80%. Interesting findings are there from the less developed regions and least developed countries. In case of less developed regions, 4% of the countries were having policy to raise the immigration level in 1976. So, the percentage of governments with a policy to raise the immigration level increased from 4% in 1976 to 14% in 2013. The percentage of governments with policy to maintain or no intervention in the immigration level declined from 84% to 58%. On the other hand, the proportion of governments with policy to reduce the immigration level increased from 12% to 29%. Similar kinds of patterns emerge for the least developed countries as well. The next part of the table 1 gives the results by major areas of the world like Africa, Asia, Europe, etc. Now, let us move to the second aspect of the immigration policy response, namely allowing dual citizenship. Whether or not one is allowed to retain one's original citizenship upon acquiring citizenship of another country is an important consideration for some of the migrants. Acquisition of citizenship in destination country has implications for one's rights and entitlements, obligations, socio-economic integration and prospects for their family members. It also affects the migrants' link with their countries of origin. When countries of origin do not allow dual citizenship, migrants are forced to make a decision with regard to their choice of citizenship. In 2013, over half of the governments, 55% to be precise, had policies that allowed their citizens abroad to retain their citizenship of origin without any restriction while acquiring a second country's citizenship. 19% of the countries allowed their immigrants to keep their citizenship of origin while acquiring another country's citizenship, but only under certain conditions. These relate primarily to two aspects. One relates to the countries involved and the second one relates to the rights involved. The remaining 26% of the countries did not have provisions to allow dual citizenship at all. Thus, non-restrictive dual citizenship policies were equally common in more developed as well as less developed regions. It stands at about 55% in each of these regions, but it is somewhat less observed in case of the least developed countries, 47%. Thus, the figures were about 55% in case of more developed regions and less developed regions and 47% in case of the least developed countries. If we take the converse of this, a small proportion of the governments in more developed regions had a total prohibition of dual citizenship, which stands at 14% compared to 30% in case of less developed regions and 33% in case of the least developed countries. In the Latin America, and the Caribbean that recorded highest percentage of countries that allow dual citizenship without any restriction. 82% was the figure. In the case of Asia, the percentage of countries prohibiting dual citizenship stands at 48%. The prohibitive policies were also relatively common in Oceania and Africa, with percentage being 31% and 26% respectively. Now, let us look at table 2 that gives the information about the number and proportion of governments with policies to allow dual citizenship as on 2013. As on 2013, across the world, 55% of the countries were having policies to give dual citizenship without any restrictions, whereas 19% of the governments across the world were having policies to give dual citizenship with some restrictions, whereas 26% had no policy at all. Means 26% of the governments were not having policy to allow dual citizenship. In case of more developed regions, 55% of the governments were having policy to allow dual citizenship without any restrictions, whereas 31% had policies to give dual citizenship with some restrictions. Similar kind of trend can be seen in case of the less developed regions. In case of the first response, having policy to allow dual citizenship without any restrictions, it remains same, but there is very low percentage compared to the more developed regions in case of the percentage of governments having policy to allow dual citizenship with some restrictions. Let us move to figure 3. It gives the government's response through policy interventions regarding dual citizenship by level of development. All the countries we have seen 55% were having non-restrictive dual citizenship permissions, 19% were having restrictive dual citizenship policies. In case of more developed regions, 55%, less developed regions 55% of the governments allow dual citizenship with some restrictions. In case of the least developed regions, 20% of the governments were allowing dual citizenship with some restrictions. This proportion was much higher in case of more developed regions, standing at about 31%. In this module, we have looked at the policies relating to immigration. As we have seen, immigration generates opportunities as well as challenges for the countries of origin. Some of the developing countries consider immigration as a strategy to boost the development through remittances, investments and knowledge transfer, etc. 25% of the governments worldwide had policies to reduce the level of immigration, while 10% of the governments had policies to enhance the immigration levels. In 2013, more than half of the governments had policies that allowed their citizens abroad to retain the citizenship of origin without any restrictions while acquiring the second country's citizenship. Means 55% of the governments across the world had dual citizenship policies without any restrictions. Small proportion of the governments in the more developed region had a total prohibition of dual citizenship, 14% than the governments in the less developed region or the governments of least developed countries, standing about 30 to 33%. So, this module helped us to get a closer look at the kind of policy response of the governments to the issues relating to immigration in terms of a policy to reduce the level or enhance the level or maintain the same level of immigration. We also have seen the policy response of the governments with regard to dual citizenship. The three categories of responses were there. Number one, giving dual citizenship without any restrictions. Number two, giving dual citizenship with some restrictions. Number three, no dual citizenship at all. Many of the governments were in favor of giving dual citizenship to the people of their country who migrated to other countries. By and large, this module has given us fair understanding about the kind of policy response of the governments to the issues that are emerging from immigration levels. Thank you so much.